Hi, I'm Eddie Guidry. Thanks for joining me again today, and welcome to EC&M Asks. It's a new Q&A video series brought to you by EC&M Magazine and found on the members only section of our website, in which readers ask pressing technical questions, and hopefully today I can add clarity to a couple of them. For those that don't know me, I've been in the electrical industry in both construction and design engineering for more than 45 years. For the past 25 years, I've been a part of many national and international industry codes and standards and committees, including 21 years on Code Making Panel 11 and currently on Panel 14. And then also many IEEE standard committees as well. Since 2002, I've been a contributor for EC&M Magazine, addressing various industrial technical issues. So let's get to the first question, and that is concerning the NEC and OSHA. The reader asks, are NEC and OSHA electrical requirements the same, and why do we have both? So they're similar in many ways, but they're not the same. So let's discuss OSHA's role and purpose first. So what we call 29 CFR, that's Code of Federal Regulations, Part 1910, Subpart S, pertains to general electrical installations. And Part 1926, Subpart K, pertains to electrical installations during construction. The purpose of OSHA, whether it be federally or state mandated, requires employers to provide employees working in a working environment that is free from hazards that may cause death or serious injury. When an OSHA inspector visits a facility, they can cite an employer for failure to comply with federal law if the employer failed to keep its workplace free from any hazards that to which employees were exposed, or the hazard is recognized, the hazard was likely to cause death or serious physical harm, and there was a feasible and economically viable way to correct that hazard. The purpose of OSHA regulations is to require these employers to keep their employees safe at work, and this is found in their general duty clause that you've probably heard of before. It's 5(a)(1). If you're more curious about find out more about that, you can actually Google General Duty Clause 5(a)(1) and read more about it. Receiving a safety citation from OSHA requires an employer to remedy that situation, and there may be fines included with that. When OSHA was voted into law in 1970, parts of it were based on the latest edition of the National Electric Code at that time. It still has very familiar NEC language in parts 1910 and 1926 today. And they do update it occasionally with the changing National Electric Code editions. There are areas throughout the OSHA documents where you're going to find nearly identical requirements and language. One of those instances is, say, for working space around electrical equipment in front of the equipment. So but there's many other NEC requirements that you're not going to find in OSHA. An example of some of the things you would not find is a very detailed and prescriptive requirement for electrical installations in hazardous classified locations found in National Electric Code Chapter 5. But OSHA 1910 Subpart S, Section 1910.307, (c)(3), however, does make a reference to the NEC as one way to ensure compliance with 29 CFR Part 1910 Subpart S, Section 307. The bottom line with OSHA inspectors is they can't cite the employer for any violations of national standard or document such as NFPA 70, the National Electric Code, or 70E even, that's outside the federal statutes unless the standard is specifically referenced as part of the Occupational Safety Hazards Act. However, they can and do use consensus standards like the National Electrical Code and NFPA 70E as a resource to evaluate a situation to determine if any OSHA laws were violated. OSHA laws are mandatory in all parts of the United States and its territories, whether they be federally or state enforced, and OSHA doesn't apply in other countries. The NEC, on the other hand, where it's adopted as law, is much more comprehensive and detailed and is very prescriptive code, with the use being the practical safeguarding of persons and property from hazards arising from the use of electricity in any of the installation locations covered in Article 90.2(b). So it's important to note that compliance with the NEC is not mandatory unless the jurisdiction you're working in has adopted it as law. But OSHA is mandatory for all employers to keep their employees safe. With that, we've got another question that kind of plays into that same subject, and it's about what's the difference between the terms approved and acceptable in the NEC versus OSHA in this, using those same words in Part 1910 subpart S. To answer this one, let's look at what OSHA Part 1910 subpart S, section 1910.399, where the definitions are for these terms. When OSHA is talking about the word acceptable, it's an installation or equipment that is acceptable to the Assistant Secretary of Labor and approved, and there's that word, within the meaning of subpart S. So the first thing on the list is to be acceptable. It's accepted or certified, listed, or labeled, or otherwise determined to be safe by a national recognized testing laboratory, or NERTL. With number 2 on the list, with respect to an installation or equipment of a kind that no NERTL accepts, certifies, lists, or labels, or determines to be safe if it is inspected or tested by another federal agency or by a state, municipality, or other local authority having responsibilities for enforcing occupational safety provisions of the National Electrical Code, and it's found to be in compliance with the provisions of the National Electrical Code as applied in this subpart, then it would be acceptable. So the third option that you could have something acceptable to an OSHA inspection or inspector would be with respect to custom-made equipment, such as a control panel that's unique, or related installations that are designed, fabricated for, and intended for use by a particular customer. If it's determined to be safe for its intended use by its manufacturer on the basis of test data, which the employer keeps and makes available for inspection to the Assistant Secretary or his authorized representatives. So that covered, what is acceptable to an OSHA inspector and what it means in Part 1910 subpart S. So now let's talk about what approved means. To be approved, it has to be acceptable to the authority having enforcing this subpart. The authority enforcing this subpart is the Assistant Secretary of Labor for Occupational Safety and Health. The definition of acceptable indicates that what is acceptable to the Assistant Secretary of Labor and therefore approved within the meaning of this subpart. Now, of course, the actual Assistant Secretary of Labor will not be inspecting your facility, but one of their deputy inspectors can. In the 2023 edition of the NEC, the term approved is defined as acceptable to the authority having jurisdiction. The authority having jurisdiction, or AHJ approval, is a lot easier to obtain if the equipment is listed by a NERDL. So you're sort of killing two birds with one stone by satisfying the local AHJ and OSHA at the same time if you're using a NERDL listed or labeled equipment. Other qualified third-party testing laboratories, agencies may be acceptable to the authority having jurisdiction as well. And the local AHJ even may take it upon themselves to approve equipment or the installation, but it's highly unlikely if you don't have some sort of third-party certification or approval. However, one way a local AHJ may approve the equipment or installation that is not listed is to have that third-party NERDL inspector come out and take a look at it and make sure it complies with the comparable UL product standards or NERDL product standards. Typically, when this occurs on a site, consensus industry standards such as NFPA 79, that's the electrical standard for industrial machinery, if that's applicable, can be used. And then NFPA 791, which is the recommended practice and procedures for unlabeled electrical equipment evaluation, can also be used to evaluate unlabeled equipment in accordance with nationally recognized standards and any requirements of the AHJ. The 2023 handbook has some great commentary about the word approved and what may be acceptable to the authority having jurisdiction as well. The NEC, when it comes to the term acceptable, really doesn't, in Article 100, doesn't define that, but in Article or Section 110.2, it does say the conductors and equipment required or permitted by this code shall be acceptable only if approved. So while there are small differences in the languages between the NEC and OSHA, they're very much similar and with nearly identical intentions. The main intention or the main difference that or that OSHA actually names the assistant secretary and his authorized representatives as the AHJ and defines national recognized testing laboratories as being acceptable qualified third-party testing agencies. So hopefully that helps clear up some of that, because it is rather complicated. In an effort to keep these videos short and interesting, we'll wrap it up on this question, where we've received a couple more questions pertaining to these subjects as well that are in the queue. So please join us again with more answers to your questions coming soon in the EC&M members only portal. Thanks again so much for your interest in this edition of EC&M Asks, produced by EC&M Magazine. And it's a part of the portfolio of Endeavor Business Media Publications.